Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today we have a guest visiting from the UK, Philip Wright. Welcome, Philip.
Alison, good to meet you.
Yeah. And so Philip is going to talk to us about how to prevent and repair soil compaction. And before in fact, some of you may have listened to Philip because he did do a webinar for FAR last year. So we've now actually got him face to face, which is really good. So maybe let's just start off by you giving us a little bit of a background of, who you are and where you come from and what you do.
Okay, Alison, thank you. Yeah, I trained actually as an agricultural engineer many years ago. And subsequent, that was in UK at Silso. And then I actually became technical director of a machinery manufacturer, Simba. And some of the guys listening will probably relate to that yellow equipment. There's quite a few bits of kit over here still. And I did that for 28 years, technical director. So I was into understanding why soils need to behave as they do. And for the last 17, I've been self-employed, advising as an independent farmers on soils and cultivations.
So let's just talk about the key issues that growers have to be aware of with respect to soil compaction when they're using, harvesting machinery.
Yeah, well, Alison, the key really is to understand the soil a little bit. And when soils are generally wet or loose or both, they're very weak. They're mechanically not very capable of supporting much weight. So they are very vulnerable to damage at that point. If you can sort of think of a soil as a sponge, really, as a series of solid bits, sand, silt, clay, rocks, stones, and the holes in there, the pores, and they're both important, those things. We need pores for basically storing water, for a pathway for roots. We need a home for the biology, and those pores are equally as important as the solid bits, really. And if we now start to impose loads and those soils are a very weak sponge, those pores get really crushed and become very much smaller or non-existent, and we start to lose the ability to support crops through having oxygen in our soils with air and water and pathways for roots. So it's really important to try and keep that sponge open. So if we drive over a soil in a wetter situation like now at harvest over here, it's likely we're going to squeeze those pores down and we're going to give ourselves compromise in the future for the next crop that's coming.
Yeah. And what kind of yield loss can you get in badly compacted soils?
It's a good question. Painting the ultimate bad picture for you.
Yeah.
Really, really compacted soils won't allow roots to pass. You could lose all the yield. Your crop could die if it's really severe. But there are degrees of that, and certain crops are more capable of coping with compaction than others. A weakly rooting crop such as canola or something like that, or peas or a pulse crop or something, really struggles to get through compaction, whereas a cereal crop, grassland, has got a bit more chance. So it does depend on the crop. It depends on the soil. It depends very much on the moisture, which is really why I'm sat in front of you, I think. Yeah. So a yield loss up to 100%, but I've measured a lot of yield losses as a result of the drilling tractor passing over the ground after harvest, putting a crop in. And if the pressure on the soil with the tyres of that tractor is something like 1 bar, we could be measuring a 30% yield loss in those areas.
Okay.
Which is significant.
Yeah. So how do growers make sure that they minimise those negative impacts?
I think we have to accept we're in a situation where we're going to have negative impacts. So the extent of that negative impact, check where we're driving, try and control where we drive. Don't head randomly out with the trailer or the chaser and follow the combine straight to it. Try and go down tram lines if you've got them. Try and keep to known areas that are probably firmer anyway, if we can. If we're removing residues through baling and stuff like that, then again, don't try and avoid going randomly across a field. Try and keep to those known areas, because it's going to minimise where the problem is. And if it's then defining the extent of the problem, which we'll talk about, no doubt, if you can minimise where it is, you can minimise the need to correct it.
Yeah. And presumably you have to think about managing this over the full rotation of the crops that you're going to have on your farm in any one paddock.
Totally. So if we've got a range of crops, we've got that broad rotation, which is good. It's good for farming to have broad rotations. I'm a big believer in that. I think if you're going to work with nature, you've got to rotate crops, you've got to rotate tillage, you've got to rotate depths you work, just to try and avoid. If you give nature a common thing, it'll evolve around it, won't it? And it'll evolve a solution to what you're trying to do, or a problem to what you're trying to do. So rotation, very important. So yeah, if we can keep to those known areas throughout a rotation, brilliant. It's not always possible, depending on the crops you're growing within the rotation. It might be you've got grass in the rotation. I like grass as a break, or not necessarily a break. Some people would say that's the crop, and I've got arable as the break. But having that variability really helps to improve the soil, the biology, and overall that resilience.
Yeah. And of course, if you do have a little bit of compaction, just going in and doing a really heavy cultivation is not necessarily the answer. So addressing, how do you repair situations where you've got soil compaction?
It's good. So I think we need to understand first the extent of it.
Yeah.
Because if we don't understand how bad it is, or how deep it is, or how not so bad it is, we're not going to be able to correct it properly. So the most important bit of kit the farmer has to do that on his farm now, or her farm now, is a spade. We need to get out there and have a look and have a dig down. We don't have to dig the paddock up, but we need to have an awareness of where the problem is. So we need to dig down and check that out. And that might differ. It might be different on the turning headlands in parts of that paddock. It might be a lot kinder, less of a problem in the body of the actual paddock itself. If it is, there really is no point in applying the same technique to both of those areas, because you're either underdoing it on the headland, or you're overdoing it, costing you a lot of money, and unnecessarily doing it in the rest of the paddock itself. So understand the extent. A little way you could do that when we're looking at trafficking and compaction is just monitor and gauge how deep the ruts are that you've just made. Now, if we're in a dry season, if we're in a dry harvest, you could drive over a paddock, probably not even see where you've been. Very little damage, very little reduction in those pores, because a depth of a rut is effectively how much we've reduced those pores by.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got a rut, you haven't got a big problem. If you've got deeper ruts, then the alarm bells should be suggesting, we're going to have to watch this. Get the spade out, have a dig down, and see how deep the extent of that problem's going, and then we can start to consider how we can correct it. If we need to correct it in the first case, if we don't have to, if there isn't much of a problem, roots can get through, I would leave it alone. But I know your soils quite well over here, and zero till is hugely challenging. I come from the UK, where we've got very heavy soils, very high clay content, structurally strong soils that are capable of being treated in one way. We've got high silt soils like you have over here, silt fraction in many places, that really don't like nothing being done to them, because they naturally aren't self-structuring. They naturally want to slump. It's not your fault. It's not the fault of the country. It is a feature of a silt fraction soil. So I would expect your growers to be thinking, we're going to have to do stuff to help, but it's not necessarily how much you do, but how little you do to be effective. I would prefer to do as little as possible, provided we're doing the right job.
Yeah.
And always remembering that, and I'm an arch problem in this in my old life when I was designing tillage machinery, but when we move soil with a lump of metal, we're not actually really going to correct a structural problem. We're relying on biology and nature, roots growing and natural processes to do that. However, if those roots or natural processes are compromised and can't get through the soil in the first place, we've got to give them a pathway. So the metal can come in to very good effect then to facilitate that initial pathway for the roots, the biology, water, air, and everything.
So in your consultancy company that you've got back in the UK, how knowledgeable are the UK growers around, sort of the extent of compaction they have and all the range of management practices that they can use to try and repair or mitigate it? And how does that compare with what you think the situation is like in New Zealand?
This isn't me being complimentary, but all farmers are pretty good at what they do, in my humble opinion.
That will be a good comment. We will have to quote that somewhere.
Because if they weren't, they wouldn't be farming and they wouldn't be surviving. So I don't believe it's my job to tell any farmer what to do, but I rather regard it as it's my role to give a farmer the facts, the science, the understanding to help them make a better informed decision, really. And that might sound like marketing from my point of view, but I think if most farmers, to answer your question directly, in the UK, and my experience of a number over here, very similar. Most farmers do know what they've got to do. It's just that sometimes they say to me, I might just want another pair of eyes just to confirm. I've dug down, I think I've got compaction here. Is it serious? Well, are the roots there? Is water being held up? It's more really just supporting them and, your decision is primarily right. We probably don't need to go quite as deep, or do you need to go as deep? Have a look. Get the penknife out when you've dug the hole and just have a look, see how the soil is behaving, So I very much regard it as quite a pleasurable job, this, because I've got the guy driving the car and he's doing an okay job. We haven't crashed. We're doing all right. And occasionally he'll say, do we want to be left or right here, or could we just carry on a bit? And it's a little bit like that, really, my job, I think.
Yeah. So what would be the top 3 things then that you would say that growers have to keep at the front of their mind when they're thinking about compaction?
Okay, so try and avoid it, try and minimise it. So think about where you drive, think about how you drive. What I mean by that is the pressure you're applying to the soil. Now, the pressure you apply to the soil is directly relating to the pressure in a tyre or under a track, basically. It's not quite as simple as that, but it'll do. It's pretty close. So the higher the pressure, more squeezing action, the more we're going to compromise those pores. So if we can reduce pressure within limits, and there are limits here, a lot of your farmers will probably have to travel large distances between paddocks, and they don't want to be going at dawdling speed. They want to be getting on. So we've got to be applying minimum safe pressures within those tyres. I'm never going to say to a grower, drop them down to X bar, point X of a bar, let's say. It depends on what that tyre is, its spec, what the loading on it is. But number 1, minimise within safe limits the pressure, minimise, number 2, where you drive. And if we can then start to build resilience over time in those paddocks, have in the back of your mind that, do you really need to be going as deep, as intensively? Most farmers, having had a good dig and a discussion with them, would probably say, I'm probably not necessarily have to go as deep as this, do I? Yeah. If we can rotate that, to bring your point about rotations, if we could rotate those depths over a succession of crops within that growing cycle. If we can rotate those depths, vary those depths, we don't encourage a plane of weakness at one level by cutting those pores all at one depth. Yeah. That's not good news, that. No. Vary it. Avoid it sometimes. Do we need to move all of the soil all the way across? Could we leave structured columns, as I might want to call them? Could we leave columns in the soil that are less moved? If we facilitated drainage in areas and we facilitated root pathways, could we leave areas less moved? Those areas are supportive, better supportive. When you move soil, it weakens it as well. Mm-hmm. We have to be careful here. Those structured columns are also a haven for the biota, particularly the stuff that hate's been moved, mashed. You can't really, mycorrhizal fungi hate.
I was just about
mashed.
To say mycorrhiza.
They
just
hate
it. Yeah.
So can we leave a zone for them that we haven't muddled around with? We'll facilitate everything between them and use those zones. They'll recolonise across. That work's been done. And I know today isn't about science, but work's been done for that level of biota to then recolonise across very quickly back, provided the crop's suitable. So we can actually win-win here by doing less, saving ourselves fuel perhaps, but also improving the job for the biology. That is a win-win-win situation. So
is there any sort of real innovations in the hardware side of things, in the machinery, to try and, I guess, mitigate the compaction issues? And what are they? So higher specification, more flexible tyres, tracks. Tracks are an interesting subject, which is probably for another podcast, but I'm not against them. But so the ability to have tracks or tyres that can impose reduced pressure, very flexible tyres, VF style of tyres can do that. They cost more money, but they can reduce the problem in the first place. Controlling where we drive. Where we drive. So guidance that will allow us to keep to areas, to pathways, provided we don't make hooking deep ruts in those. Yeah. Technologies to be able to vary pressure quickly. So we could go into the paddock, drop the pressure down, do the jobs we want to do, and whip the pressure back up again so we could go quickly down the road and not have damage on the tyre, So those technologies are good. I think technologies to better manipulate soil to stretch it and create vertical cracks without boiling it to the point where we lose structural support. So there are technologies with different tines and different, the way those tines could be arranged. Do they actually fit all the way across? Could we have the zones? So we could start to think about all of those things. They can cost money, but again, have you got the bit of kit that you could just modify? In terms of Kiwi farmers are as resourceful, if not more resourceful than the UK farmers, and both are a resourceful bunch. Do we need to go and buy shiny new kit for absolutely every part of what I'm talking about? Probably not. We can probably adapt what we've got to do some of it and save that money and invest in the shiny bits that we can't do that to. And I think growers in New Zealand, just from my experiences, they understand how important maintaining the quality of their soil is, because that is basically their future. If they don't look after their soil, they haven't got a future as a farmer. 100%. I've yet to meet a farmer who doesn't respect his soil or her soil and want to improve it. And that's how it should be. Have we always done that in the past? Probably not. Probably that's been driven because we haven't known some of the problems that we've been putting in sometimes, or the extent of them. But I agree with you. It's the farmer's number one asset. Yeah. But you have to balance everything that you do on the farm around maintaining, quality soil and biodiversity and everything, with the fact that you've got to make money as well. 100%. And I think this is where it can be a win-win, because if you can continue to grow, and this should be a primary aim, if you can continue to grow healthy,
well-yielding, good, top-yielding crops, they're going to be putting into the ground good root systems. You can't grow a good yielding crop without a good root system. And a good root system is the starting point for structuring the soil. So this is a win-win. If we can facilitate a good root system, we're going to facilitate better soil structure and we're going to hopefully support the yield. Yeah. I'm not one of the band that would believe we can put up with reduced yields if we do less tillage, if I'm quite frank with you. I don't believe that's a pathway to success.
Well, we know in New Zealand that having the high yields that we have is the only way our farmers can actually be profitable. I mean, we can't compete against, sort of the cost structures and the efficiencies of scale that other arable sectors have overseas. So, we have to maintain those yields.
And I think by doing that very thing, your growers are maintaining a better soil structure.
Yeah.
Because they're powering roots through it. The solution to soil problems isn't metal, he says, having worked for 28 years doing it. It's actually to empower roots to do it.
Yeah.
But metal can be quite important to do.
Well, it is. And I think that this is something that it's really important that maybe people who don't come from an agricultural background, is that farmers use all of these tools for a reason. And, it's easy to say, oh, well, you shouldn't cultivate, we should go to all no-till. But there are many, many good reasons why you have to move soil around, depending on the soil type, depending on what you're growing, depending on the season. Growers don't do things that haven't over the years been beneficial to productivity.
Totally agree. And I think New Zealand is a country that has got a combination of quite a lot of factors in there: high silt content soils, your weather generally, more extreme, the type of cropping you do as well. I think there's a lot of factors there that drive the need to be respectful of the soil, but employ cultivations to maximise all of that. Yeah,
Excellent. Now, I think somebody did tell me that you are coming back to New Zealand, and we are going to try and get you to do some workshops. Is that right? Do you know about that?
Yeah, Chris has talked to me about that. It's good. If my natural habitat these days is in a hole in the ground, really, digging the soil and looking at it. I'm out my comfort zone at the same level as you, Alison, here. I prefer to be looking at the soil, showing what's going on and discussing what we can do about it. Do we need to do anything about it? So, the plan is hopefully to do a series of those. I look forward to that.
Absolutely. I think our growers will look forward to it as well. So thank you very much, Philip. And thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.